So today in college football, we saw two pretty big upsets, especially in the top six, with number 6 LSU falling to unranked Mississippi State 44-34, and with number 3 Oklahoma losing to unranked Kansas State 38-35. So, upsets aren't really uncommon in college football, with the essence of college football being with the unpredictability of it and the upset nature that always happens every year. But the way that these two teams lost, I think, has a lot of indications, and let's break it down. So let's start with LSU and Mississippi State. First, obviously, credit needs to be given to Mike Leach and the coaching staff at Mississippi State, and of course, their quarterback, KJ Castell, who played outstanding against this LSU defense. But I think we need to put everything into perspective. And now this isn't me trying to make excuses for this LSU team, which should have played better. But let's just put things into perspective to understand why LSU really struggled the way they did. Now, first of all, this LSU team lost 31 players from their championship roster last year, including 14 players who left to the NFL, and then more players through opt-out or transfers or being dismissed from the team. And some notable players, of course, Joe Burrow, who quite possibly had the greatest single season by a quarterback in college football history, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, who opted out, Thaddeus Moss. So basically, they lost all of their offensive playmakers. Most of them, at least. And if you look at the defense on all three levels, from the defensive line to the linebacking core to the secondary, they lost a lot of people. Only 3 returning starters from last year's defense on this defense. And 2 of them didn't even play today. And that was defensive tackle Clem Logan and All-American cornerback Derek Stingley Jr., which, by the way, his loss was very, very much felt, as Flott and the others on this secondary was struggling big time against this Mississippi State air raid offense. And one notable area, I think, was probably the biggest area where the lack of continuity hurt LSU the most is the offensive line. LSU only has 1 returning starter from their offensive line this year, and that's right tackle Austin Deculus. So they're starting left guard, left tackle, center, right guard from last year are all gone. So with that lack of continuity on the offensive line, that obviously will translate into struggles and, a lot of quarterback pressure. And that's what exactly happened today against Mississippi State. So last year, the most Joe Burrow ever got sacked in a single game was 5 times. Today, Myles Brennan got sacked 7 times. I'll say that again. Myles Brennan got sacked 7 times today against a Mississippi State defensive front. Not only that, but the constant quarterback pressure, the pressure on him, and he was under duress for the majority of the game. That led to Myles Brennan having slow reads, miscommunication with his receivers, and also his pocket presence was really lacking throughout the entire game. And that's not really what LSU fans are acquainted to, because Joe Burrow was so good under pressure last year. But let's look at last year. Joe Burrow got sacked 5 times, 2 times last year. That was against Alabama and Clemson, 2 of the best teams in college football in recent history, and 2 elite defenses coached by 2 elite head coaches in Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney. So Alabama and Clemson sacked Joe Burrow 5 times last year, and now Mississippi State sacks Myles Brennan 7 times. I'm not trying to discredit Mississippi State, but there's a clear disparity between Mississippi State and Alabama and Clemson. So this lack of continuity on the offensive line clearly shows you one of the biggest reasons why LSU struggled all of today. Obviously their offense is not what it was from last year. Now, so obviously I just pointed out the lack of continuity on the roster for LSU, but pairing that with the lack of continuity on the coaching staff. So the passing coordinator, Joe Brady, of course, went to the Carolina Panthers for the offensive coordinator job, and defensive coordinator Dave Ronda left to become the head coach at Baylor. So you have the new defensive coordinator, and then, of course, Steve Ensminger is still there, but the guy who really was planning that offense last year is gone. Then you have schematic changes. So you pair that schematic change with a lack of continuity on the roster, also paired with the limited training camps throughout all of spring and summer because of a global pandemic, then obviously you're going to get what you got today with a team that lacked efficiency, that a team that looked off all game, that lacked communication, and also lacked experience. But Mississippi State played well. I'm not going to take away from them because they successfully implemented an air raid offense into the SEC, where a lot of people said the SEC will stop the air raid offense. And obviously that wasn't the case, with Costello throwing for 600 yards and 5 touchdowns against the LSU defense. But I think it's rather premature to say that air raid is going to be successful for a long term, because again, it wasn't an elite LSU defense you saw today. It was an inexperienced LSU defense for the most part. And now let's look at Oklahoma and Kansas State. So whereas LSU lacked continuity and had a lot of coaching changes, I think Oklahoma's story is a little bit different. So it's actually the converse of that, because Kansas State was missing 7 starters coming into this game. So Kansas State was the team that was lacking continuity the most. And of course, Oklahoma came into this season with high hopes, with early Heisman favorite in Spencer Rattler, and they immediately lose 38-35 to Kansas State. This is the second consecutive year that Oklahoma has lost to Kansas State. Now, I want to draw comparisons between last year's loss to Kansas State and this year's loss, because there's a lot of parallels to be made. Last year, Kansas State defeated 7th-ranked Oklahoma 48-41. Now, the key thing here to note in why Oklahoma lost is because last year in the third quarter, Kansas State outscored Oklahoma 17-0. 17-0. This year, today, Oklahoma was outscored in the fourth quarter by the exact same margin, 17-0. So what is that indicative of? That Oklahoma is giving up these 17-0 quarters, especially in the second half. I think that's indicative of Lincoln Riley's inability to stay aggressive. It's his conservative play style when he thinks that he has a comfortable lead. And that's really a pressing issue, because now it's rather a trend and pattern that we're seeing with Lincoln Riley and his Oklahoma team. Let's look at last year, Oklahoma and Iowa State. Oklahoma was up 42-21, and then going into the fourth quarter, Iowa State scored 20 unanswered points in that fourth quarter to Oklahoma's 0 points. So again, it's another case of where in the second half, Oklahoma's being vastly outscored in the critical quarter. And Iowa State ended up losing by 1 point, 42-41, but that was only because when they scored a touchdown with about 20 seconds left, and instead of taking that game-tying extra point, they went for the game-winning 2-point conversion, and ultimately they failed to convert. So they were 1 2-point conversion away of giving Oklahoma yet another loss where they had a clear lead early in the game. And yeah, these are 3 different games, but let's also look at today with Lincoln Riley's play calling and decision making. Oklahoma had a 4th and 7 with a little under 3 minutes left to play in the game, and they only had 1 timeout, and they were trailing. And what did Lincoln Riley do? I think this was a key moment of the game. Lincoln Riley decided to punt. Lincoln Riley decided to punt on a 4th and 7 with a high-powered offense, Heisman favorite in Spencer Rattler, with under 3 minutes left and just 1 timeout against an offense that your defense really had struggled to stop all game long, and Lincoln Riley decided to punt back to them. I don't understand why Lincoln Riley did that. That is a move that shows me that you're playing conservative. You're playing not to win, but to not lose, you know? So that's not a win. That's not a move that you do if you want to be a winner, if you want to be a championship contender. You got to be bold. You got to trust in that high-powered offense that your team is notable for. And instead, you're going to try to put in trust in a defense that struggled for all of the second half. because it did play well in the first half, but it completely came unraveled in the second half. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Oklahoma lost, but also that's not trying to mask all the other glaring issues for Oklahoma on the offensive line, where they struggled to protect Rattler, where he was under constant pressure all game. On their defensive line, who struggled to generate pressure and to sack the quarterback on Kansas State, giving him a lot of time to throw. Their inability to have to contain speed players on the Kansas State's offense, like Deuce Vaughn, who had 4 catches for 129 yards, one of them coming on a 77-yard play. And actually, Deuce Vaughn, he reminds me of Darren Sproles and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that, small stature and speedy, explosive player. So Oklahoma has the same exact problems as last year: conservative play calling, especially when it comes late in the game, and a leaky defense. And that's troubling for a coach who was, the favorite to become Dallas Cowboys head coach, and the coach who Dallas Cowboys fans have been calling for, especially after their week 1 loss, where they were like, hey, Mike McCarthy's not it. We should have gotten Lincoln Riley, but Lincoln Riley is here losing to Kansas State. So I think that we should kind of pump the brakes on the Lincoln Riley hype, but also Lincoln Riley is a great coach. I think it's rather premature to say that Oklahoma and LSU are done for this year. It's college football. It's just the beginning of the season. Anything can happen. We saw other top teams struggle today. We saw Texas struggle against an unranked Texas Tech going into overtime. We saw Georgia actually struggling for a majority of the game against Arkansas. I mean, the final score doesn't show you it, but they struggled for the majority of that game. So, Oklahoma and LSU will be good. They'll be better. They'll improve over the season. And especially with LSU, when it's schematic changes lacking continuity on that offensive defense, you're going to get your players to have more experience and really come up to game speed. So I expect them to be better. But Oklahoma and LSU, these were huge losses to them. They're going to drop in the rankings. But I think that we need to kind of chill out on these overreactions, like saying that Spencer Rattler is not a good quarterback, or saying that Oklahoma is done for or LSU is done for. Same with Miles Brennan. I think he played relatively well, especially for his first career start in over 1,400 days. We've seen him kill it in high school. Obviously, it's not the same as the collegiate level, but Miles Brennan will also improve. He'll improve on that pocket presence and also improve on how to perform when under duress.